How's it going, guys? In today's video, we'll quickly go over the weapons you should be upgrading in Swordmaster Story. Now before I start, let me begin by explaining what makes a weapon good. A weapon is generally good if it has all or many of these things, such as team-wide buffs, ability to debuff the enemy, damage amplification, active skill damage, and additional boss damage. In terms of offensive stats, damage amplification is going to be better than simply attack. This is why in S tier, many of the weapons will have damage amplification in addition to active skill damage or boss damage. For your healers and support characters who don't focus on damage, it's best to equip them with weapons that provide either buffs to the team, +1 to all their skills, or debuffs to the enemy. In summary, if a weapon has multiple of these preferred stats, then they can be considered S tier and should be upgraded to the max level of 120. Now if a weapon has maybe one or two of these preferred stats, or they're best in slot for a specific character, then I would place them in A tier and at least upgrade them to level 100. Weapons in B tier are weapons that I feel you can skip on getting to 100, though they may be many of the weapons you can only obtain during the beginning of the game. You could upgrade these to 50 while you're waiting to find better weapons. As for the weapons in C tier, I would skip these altogether as they're not worth upgrading at all. And with all that said, let's get into the finer details. Starting with S tier, we have the Crimson Oath, which is the best in slot for Arena and could be best in slot for many of the archers. The stats are great but not the best. The important fact about this weapon is that it can turn Rena fire, which is super useful when you have team skills that benefit from more fire allies on the team, so this takes a spot in S tier. Next is the Poison Blade. This blade is great because it poisons the enemy, which lowers their defense. I generally put this on someone who does little damage like Kain. The defense debuff actually helps your team deal more damage overall than if I had equipped Kain with a DPS weapon. Following this, we have the Eternal Sleep, which is the best in-slot weapon for Selene. This is because it provides +5 monster penetration, which benefits any healer whose active skill scales with monster penetration, such as that with Selene's active skill. That paired with the team-wide buffs it provides and active skill damage makes this the best weapon for her. Given her status on the current tier list, it only makes sense to put this in S tier as well. Next we have the Kibyssus, which is the best in-slot weapon for Hera. It allows you to change her element to light, which is better than her regular leaf element in many cases. Like with Selene, Hera's skill improves with more monster penetration, which this weapon provides, in addition to active skill damage and +1 to all her skills as we discussed before. Because it's mostly for Hera and Hera is S tier in this meta, then this weapon is S tier as well. Next is DSK. This weapon is best in slot for Haru, who is fairly high in the tier list, but is also applicable for majority of the warriors too. Equipping it on Haru allows her to be Leaf, which is generally better in most cases. This utility, along with the weapon's flexibility and decent stats such as crit damage and boss damage, puts it in S tier. Next we have the Lantern of the Underworld. When equipped by a mage or dark attribute healer, this gives great stats such as 10% damage amplification and an enemy debuff, making it one of the best mage weapons in the game, currently S tier. Similarly, the Tatsuka Sword is a great weapon for mages, especially Luna. When equipped by Luna, it changes her type to dark type, which is oftentimes better than her regular leaf element. Although there's not too much going on other than the 10% damage amplification, this weapon does offer +4 monster penetration, which benefits Luna's skills. This sword's utility and versatility is why it is in S tier. Next is the Himas Shield, which is simply one of the best weapons for healers and only healers. This is because it provides team-wide stat buffs and debuffs to enemy. Next is the Ancient Katana, which is one of the best in-slot weapons for Rhea, who is currently in S tier. She performs a lot of damage over time, and her abilities scale with accuracy, which this weapon provides 500% of. Normally this weapon is the best in-slot for her, unless the boss has physical damage panic trigger, in which case I find that the false Omphalos Stone is better for her, but only in that scenario. Next is the latest weapon soon to be released, the Muramasa, which is the best in-slot for the newest character Yura. Like the Poison Blade, it too lowers the enemy defense and comes with plenty of damage amplification and active skill damage, which satisfies most of the requirements for an S tier weapon, though only when equipped by a warrior. The Chaos Blade is another popular and relatively new weapon. Although it appears to be designed for Kain, I'd still prefer Kain to equip something like the Poison Blade because even with a stronger weapon, he doesn't do that much damage. If using this on other warriors, it still provides a ton of damage amplification, skill cooldown, active skill damage, and additional boss damage, which checks multiple boxes, so we put this in the S tier as well. In this tier, we also have the Galatine, which is the best in slot for Alice, who is also a top tier character currently. This honestly just shoves a ton of damage stats on her and any warrior, and also changes her element to light instead of water, which tends to be better, at least from testing. Purely a damage sword, S tier. Lastly in the S tier is the False Omphalos Stone, or just False Stone for short. I previously had this lower but decided to keep it at the bottom of S tier because it provides multiple great stats such as damage amplification, enemy debuffs to defense and attack, while being one of the best in slot for Rhea and a top choice for many archers such as Kana and Artemis. Next up, we have the A tier. Now these weapons are all great, but either lack an important stat or utility when compared to those in S tier. If there's a better substitute in S tier, then naturally the predecessors will go down in A tier. Some of these weapons, such as the 1000-year Foxfire, are best in slot for one character. In this case, it is best in slot for Miyu, but because Miyu isn't currently a widely used character in Raid at the top level, then this is less reason to heavily upgrade this weapon. With that explanation said, let's continue on with the A tier. First we have the Dual Blades. At first glance it has great stats, but it's just a worse version of the Chaos Blade and Galatine. The Karnwinen is best in slot for Belphegor, but is designed for Infinity Slasher mode, where there are tons of enemies. The 500% additional normal monster damage helps in this case, but we currently don't have that game mode, so this weapon is kinda pointless. She's better off using other weapons such as the Chaos Blade, Galatine, or even DSK. The Deadly Burst is a great weapon for archers, providing multiple offensive stats. Though it works best for fire and leaf archers such as Kana and Gaia, there are better alternatives in S tier such as the Crimson Oath and False Stone, so that is why this gun is in A tier. Similarly, the Blizzard Bow has great offensive stats such as 10% damage amplification, but is missing team utility such as that of the False Stone. The Rhinotaurus has team-wide buffs, though there are additional health and defense, which doesn't really help with damage, which is what is needed at the highest level. It also doesn't have good damage options like damage amplification or even boss damage. The only reason I kept it in A tier is due to its niche bonus of 400% final damage dealt to dark and fire enemies, which is useful for very specific situations. Next we have the Triana Axe. Honestly, this is an older weapon, so I already have it at level 120, but it still offers a plethora of decent damage options when equipped by any warrior character, so I think it deserves a spot between A and B tier for its strong usability with water characters. Next we have two different bows that were designed for Eros and Psyche. The light bow is generally best for Eros as it provides her some damage reduction, while also increasing her skills by 1. The Lokhera is generally the best for Psyche, but only if the situation is improved by her changing her elements from dark to fire, which is what this weapon does to her. Otherwise, there are better alternatives for archers as previously mentioned. Next we have the Erendite, which is used to be one of the best weapons due to increasing a lot of attack stat during battle. Because damage amplification, active skill damage, and boss damage have become more prevalent in the meta, this weapon goes down a tier due to lacking all of those. The Dark Sphere is just a decent weapon for dark mages, but the better alternatives are the Lantern and Tatsuka Sword. The Aardvar is a great weapon which is designed for fire characters. Fire warriors have better alternatives such as the Chaos Blade, Galatine, and DSK, and fire archers have better alternatives such as the False Stone and Deadly Burst. Fire mages can use the Underworld Lantern instead. And lastly in A tier is the Demon Book, which offers a lot of great damage stat for mages, but again the better alternatives are the Underground Lantern and the Tatsuka Sword. Healers can use the Himas Shield or Eternal Sleep instead. As for the rest of the weapons in B and C tier, I'll just skip these altogether in order to keep the video shorter and concise. They either lack most, if not all, the preferred options listed at the beginning of the video. For new players, these might be your only weapons, in which case you can upgrade them to 50, but I wouldn't upgrade further than that. and instead opt to wait until you acquire the weapons in A and S tier to upgrade to 100. If you have any specific questions about those in B and C tier, then feel free to leave them in the comment section below. To summarize everything, the best stats you should be looking out for are weapons that have team-wide stat bonuses, enemy debuffs, damage amplification, additional active skill damage, and additional boss damage. S tier weapons have most of these, A tier weapons have some of these, while B and C tier typically have none of these. For S tier weapons and some in A tier, I'd feel comfortable upgrading those to the max level of 120. For most of those in A tier, I have them upgraded to 100. I'll eventually upgrade them to 120 if I run out of things to upgrade. For B tier, I would only upgrade to around level 50, and for C tier, I'd avoid upgrading them altogether. I hope this explanation was helpful to you guys. If it was, then please give the video a like. I'd greatly appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.